At my daughter's wedding, her fiancé introduced me to his boss as an unemployed loser. He thought it would make him look powerful in front of the CEO. He had no idea the man he was trying to impress was the man I hired 20 years ago to run my company. Henderson looked at me, then looked at the groom, and said 4 words that ended the marriage before it began. "You are fired." My name is Reginald King. I am 70 years old. And this is the story of the night my son-in-law found out that the man he called a loser owned the ground he was standing on. The ballroom of the Grand Plaza Hotel glittered with crystal chandeliers and old money pretending to be new. Preston Sterling stood at its center in a white tuxedo, loud, glossy, and entirely financed by debt he hadn't told anyone about. I stood near the kitchen doors in a charcoal suit that still smelled faintly of mothballs, watching my daughter Nia glow in a dress that cost more than my first house, and watching her eyes dart nervously between her new husband and me, ashamed to bring her friends over to meet her father. To this room, I was just Reggie, the old man in the cabin, the one with the rusted truck and the fishing rod. Preston waved me over like he was summoning a servant. At the VIP table sat Mr. Henderson, the CEO of King Logistics, the man I had personally trained and handed my empire to when I stepped back into the shadows 5 years ago. He hadn't seen me since. A beard and 20 lost pounds were doing their job. "Mr. Henderson," Preston said, throwing a heavy arm around my shoulder like a yoke. "This is my father-in-law, bit of a character, unemployed for years, honestly. We invite him out of pity. Drove here in something that sounds like a lawnmower." The table chuckled. Nia stared at the floor and said nothing. Something cold and clear ignited in my chest. Not anger, clarity. I'd suspected for months that Preston's lifestyle didn't match his salary. The penthouse, the sports car, this $200,000 wedding. Watching him mock me to score points, I understood he wasn't just a liar. He was a fool who didn't know what he was standing next to. Henderson's fork froze halfway to his mouth. He was staring at my old suit, my face, the class ring on my hand, identical to his own, the ring I'd given the 5 executives who helped me hit our first billion. "Reggie," he whispered, "is that you?" I gave him the smallest nod, the same one I used to give across the boardroom table when it was time to cut a bad deal loose. Henderson stood, his chair scraping the floor loud enough to silence the room. "Mr. Sterling, you just called this man an unemployed loser. Just a joke, sir. It is not a joke to me. This man is the reason you have a job, or rather, the reason you had 1. Henderson's voice went flat and final. "You're fired, effective immediately." The music stopped. 300 guests turned. Preston's mouth opened and closed like something pulled out of water. "You can't fire me. It's my wedding day. I'm your top salesman." "You're a liability," Henderson said. "Get out of my sight!" Preston lunged, not at Henderson, but at me, screaming that I'd ruined everything. Security intercepted him before he reached me, and in the chaos, he and 2 guards crashed into a table of shrimp cocktails and ice sculptures. Glass shattered. Nia's champagne slipped from her hand and broke on the marble. The illusion of the perfect couple ended right there, live, on 100 phone cameras. Then the hotel manager walked in. Noise complaints, property damage, a breach of contract clause. He needed the remaining $30,000 balance settled immediately, in cash or on card, or he'd call the police. Preston, sweating, pulled out a black credit card with a flourish. Declined. A second card. Declined. A third. Declined. His accounts, unknown to anyone but himself, were dry. He turned on me. "You pay it. Tradition. Father of the bride." He grabbed my lapel. "Pay it, old man, or I swear you'll never see your daughter again." I reached slowly into my jacket. The whole room held its breath. Nia's shoulders dropped with relief, certain her father was about to save the day, because I always had. I handed Preston a cream envelope. He tore it open, expecting a check. Inside was a greeting card with a sailboat on the front. Inside, in my handwriting, "Independence is the greatest gift a father can give. Congratulations on your new life." "You said I was a loser," I told him. "A loser can't help a winner. You're on your own." Nia grabbed my arm, begging me to pay, reminding me I had savings. That's when I reminded her, and everyone listening, exactly how much I'd already paid. The Audi loan Preston forgot 4 months running. The down payment on their downtown condo, wired anonymously so they could brag it was his bonus. The $50,000 gambling debt from Christmas, quietly settled so men with baseball bats wouldn't show up at her door. $200,000, spent from the shadows, so my daughter could keep her dignity. Preston, cornered, ordered Nia to use the emergency card I'd given her years ago for true emergencies. I didn't stop her. I simply pulled out an old brick phone, dialed a short code to my private banking mainframe, and froze the account before the transaction cleared. Declined. Confiscated. I cut you off, I told Nia. You chose him. Now you can deal with the consequences together. Preston was dragged out in handcuffs, screaming lawsuits. I walked out to my rusted Ford, parked among the Bentleys, and drove home into the dark, knowing the war had only started. 3 days later, Preston kicked in my front door. He smashed the ceramic vase my late wife Beatrice had made 40 years ago. He threw her photograph into the dirt. Then he slapped a lawsuit on my table. $5 million for defamation, followed by a quitclaim deed. He wanted my land. It's worth maybe $50,000, he sneered. Sign it. It'll keep my kneecaps intact. He hadn't read the survey. I told him the truth. 50 hectares, timber and mineral rights included, freshly rezoned for commercial development, appraised at $12.5 million. Greed replaced his disgust instantly. When I still refused to sign, he called the county and reported my cabin as a fire hazard, hoping to have it condemned out of spite. The inspector who showed up, a man named Marcus, took one look at my name on his clipboard and went pale. He'd worked the drainage crew on a park I'd funded years ago. When Preston tried to explain who the code violator was, Marcus turned on him instead, threatened him with a citation for filing a false report, and ran him off the property. Furious that his lie had backfired, Preston played his last card in front of Nia. He told her I was hoarding millions while letting them struggle, and just like that, my own daughter turned on me.
You don't love us, she said. You just love your money.
She left with him. I let her go. Love, sometimes, means watching someone walk toward the truth the hard way. The next morning they returned, Nia in tears, demanding to know why I'd let them suffer while sitting on a fortune. I answered by dropping a thick file on the table. Months of private investigation, casino receipts, a promissory note to a Las Vegas loan shark for $200,000, hotel bookings on nights Preston claimed to be working late, a photo of him entering a motel with another woman 2 weeks before the wedding. Preston denied everything, called it forgery, called me a manipulative old man trying to buy his daughter back, until he raised his hand to strike her. I caught his wrist in midair before it landed, my grip iron, and put him on the floor. Raise your hand to my daughter again, I told him, and you will not walk out of this house. He left screaming that he'd take everything, the land, the money, the girl. That night, sitting on my porch, my brick phone buzzed. Intrusion detected. User ID, Sterling. Preston, parked outside a diner, was trying to download King Logistics' confidential client ledger to sell to a competitor and pay off his debts. What he didn't know was that the file was a trap I'd built into the system 20 years earlier, a digital guillotine. His webcam snapped his own panicked face, his hard drive wiped itself clean, and King Logistics' legal department flagged him for corporate espionage, with the FBI notified within minutes. Cornered, broke, and now facing federal charges, Preston reached for his last weapon, my age. He called Nia, spinning a story about dementia, about me raving, threatening, hoarding kerosene to burn the cabin down. Exhausted and terrified, she signed emergency commitment papers. At 2 a.m, an unmarked van pulled into my driveway. Orderlies dragged me out as Preston watched, smiling, whispering that he'd get power of attorney, the land, the money, and Nia would think she'd saved me. As they sedated me, I slipped a USB drive into my daughter's coat pocket. Watch it, I told her, my voice slurring. Then you can cry. I woke in a bare, windowless room, a warehouse for unwanted elders, not a hospital. But I wasn't trapped. I was exactly where I needed to be. At the cabin, alone, Nia finally played the drive. Hidden footage showed Preston in his car, with another woman, bragging that Nia was stupid, that once he had power of attorney, he'd sell the land, divorce her, and disappear to Miami. Nia shattered. When Preston walked in moments later, victorious and celebrating, she confronted him. He smashed the laptop to destroy the evidence, then locked her in the bedroom, warning her that if she called anyone, he'd have her committed right beside me. Back in my cell, using a scrap of wire hidden in my trousers, I picked the lock, dropped the orderly guarding the hallway with one clean strike, and took his keys. I found the facility's director counting bribe money in his office. On the wall behind him hung a plaque. The Beatrice King Foundation. I owned the building. He'd imprisoned his own benefactor for cash. Outside, my legal counsel and private security detail were already waiting with 3 Rolls-Royces. "Go to my house," I told my driver. "We're taking out the trash." At the cabin, Preston had a knife to Nia's throat, forcing her to sign the deed. When my extraction team broke down the door, they disarmed him in seconds. I walked in, no longer in a worn wool jacket, but in a tailored charcoal suit, cane in hand, every inch the man I actually was. "Who are you?" Preston stammered. "I am the man who signs the paycheck of the CEO who fired you," I said. "I own the bank that holds your mortgage. I own the land you're kneeling on. And right now, I own your life." I showed him a live FBI raid on the drug and counterfeit warehouse he'd secretly leased under my company's name, the real reason his logistics job had paid so well. He was arrested that night. Out on bail, Preston went to the press, sobbing on camera that I was a criminal mastermind holding Nia hostage. The public believed him, hashtags, protesters at my gate. So I opened the gate myself, set up a live feed on my porch, and let the world watch federal agents raid his actual warehouse in real time. Counterfeit currency, synthetic opioids, stolen electronics. Nia stood beside me and told the cameras the truth. Preston fled his parents' house as a nationwide manhunt was announced. Desperate, he called Henderson for cash and an escape route, and got me instead. I offered him a head start to a ship waiting at the old shipyard. It was a lie. There was no ship. Waiting for him instead were the men he owed $200,000 to. He was beaten in the dark until the police, real police, arriving for an unrelated call, found him broken on the concrete, begging to be arrested. Prison, for the first time in his life, sounded like safety. Weeks later, in a hospital room, Nia finally apologized for signing the papers, for choosing him, for believing a liar over her own father. I told her the truth I'd hidden since her mother died. The poverty, the humble cabin, the old truck, all of it had been a filter. Real wealth attracts people who love your bank account. I wanted Nia loved for who she was. Preston hadn't married a woman. He'd married an inheritance he assumed was coming eventually. Poverty had simply made him show his hand early. I didn't hand her a fortune. I handed her a key, a small apartment in New York, rent paid for a year, and the number of a gallery owner willing to give her an entry-level job in the art world she'd loved before Preston told her it was a waste of time. "Go make mistakes that are yours," I told her. "Go find someone who loves you when you're broke." A year later, I visited Preston in prison. He'd lost 30 pounds, his head shaved, his arrogance replaced by something hollow. He accused me of setting him up. I told him the truth. He'd dug his own hole. I'd only handed him the shovel. Then I told him what I'd done with the land he'd tried to steal. The $12.5 million property he'd been willing to threaten, lie, and terrorize a family for. I hadn't sold it. I'd donated every acre. The cabin was gone. In its place, the Beatrice King Home for Children, a shelter and support center for 200 kids with nowhere else to go. Preston screamed that I'd thrown away a fortune on strangers. I told him the only thing he still needed to hear. Your net worth is not your self-worth. You're in here because you're morally bankrupt, and no amount of money was ever going to bail you out of that. I hung up the phone, buttoned my jacket, and walked out into the sun. Waiting at the curb was my car. Henderson stood by the door, checking his watch, telling me the board was waiting on a merger that wouldn't close without my signature. I looked back once at the gray walls behind me, then got in. Let's go, I said. We have work to do. In the end, this was never just about a wedding, or a lie, or a fortune. It was about the difference between power that shouts and power that waits. And Preston thought intimidation was strength. He learned, far too late, that real strength is quiet, the discipline to stand still while the world underestimates you, and let the truth do the rest. If you believe respect has to be earned, not bought, you already understand exactly why I won.